I probably hold the world record for the most detailed dossier ever compiled on an HOA president's illicit deer hunting side hustle. Seriously, if there's a Guinness category for most comprehensive takedown of a petty tyrant using her own stupidity and a herd of legally protected cows, I'm a shoo-in. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt like your HOA was run by someone who peaked in high school and decided to make everyone else pay for it. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this particular suburban empress, who thought my heritage breed ranch was her personal hunting ground, learned a very expensive, very public lesson about messing with a retired wildlife biologist and his very special, very protected Piney Woods cattle. Buckle up, folks, because this story gets wilder than a coyote in a henhouse. It all started, as these things often do, with a misplaced sense of entitlement and a fundamental misunderstanding of property lines, mostly on the part of one Brenda Mulroney, president of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association. Oakhaven Estates, a sprawling development of McMansions painted in 50 shades of beige, bordered the western edge of my 1,000-acre ranch. My place, Red Clay Range, wasn't just land. It was a sanctuary. For years, I'd been painstakingly curating a breeding program for American Piney Woods cattle. These aren't your standard Black Angus, folks. Piney Woods are a critically endangered heritage breed, direct descendants of the first cattle brought to North America by the Spanish in the 1500s. They're smaller, hardier, come in a kaleidoscope of colors: brindle, spotted, solid red, black, dun, and are perfectly adapted to the rugged terrain of the Southeast. More importantly, they carry significant genetic importance, and in our state, specific heritage breeds like mine had recently been granted enhanced protections under agricultural conservation laws, making them almost akin to protected wildlife when it came to harassment or harm. I'd poured my life savings and my soul into this project, meticulously managing grazing patterns, ensuring genetic diversity, and working with university programs on conservation. It was more a calling than a business. Brenda, on the other hand, viewed Red Clay Range with the kind of disdain usually reserved for a particularly stubborn patch of crabgrass on her otherwise immaculate chemically treated lawn. She drove an enormous, pearl-white SUV that looked like it had never seen a gravel road, usually while wearing expensive athleisure wear that screamed, "I have a personal shopper but no actual intention of exercising." From our few, brief interactions at the shared fence line, usually her complaining about a rustic odor that was actually just good, honest earth and cow, I gathered she considered my ranch an eyesore, a blemish on the pristine, master-planned community she ruled, with an iron fist and a laminated copy of the CCRs. Her reign over Oakhaven was legendary among the few older residents who remembered a time before her ascent. Tales of her measuring lawn heights with a ruler and issuing fines for unapproved shades of mailbox were common. I mostly kept to myself, secure behind my fences and the sheer scale of my property. I figured 1,000 acres was buffer enough from even the most ambitious HOA president. I was, as it turns out, spectacularly wrong. The first hint of trouble came subtly, like the scent of rain on a distant wind. Old Man Hemlock, who owned a small parcel bordering the other side of Oakhaven and had witnessed Brenda's antics for years, mentioned over a cracked coffee mug one morning that he'd heard rumors. "Heard tell Brenda's trying to lease out some of that common woodland behind the new cul-de-sacs for hunting," he'd said, squinting at me over the rim. Said something about generating revenue for community enhancements. Probably means a new gold-plated fountain for the clubhouse nobody uses. I'd initially dismissed it. The common land was a relatively small tract, heavily wooded, and perilously close to backyards. Plus, the thought of Brenda, with her perfectly manicured nails and perpetual grimace, negotiating with a gaggle of camo-clad hunters, seemed incongruous. But Hemlock's warnings usually had a habit of proving true, often in the most inconvenient ways. He'd seen a lot of seasons change, and a lot of HOA presidents come and go, though none, he'd admitted, with quite the same tenacious queen bee energy as Brenda Mulroney. The idea of hunting so close to my perimeter, where my piney woods often grazed near the boundary fences, sent a small shiver of unease down my spine. These weren't just cows, they were a living genetic trust, and some of the younger, more skittish heifers could bolt at loud noises. Still, I figured even Brenda wouldn't be reckless enough to allow hunting directly adjacent to a working livestock operation, especially one with clearly marked fences. That, I would soon learn, was giving her far too much credit for basic common sense, let alone any respect for her neighbors or the law. The quiet rhythm of the ranch was about to be shattered by the thud of approaching incompetence. The rumors solidified into unsettling reality a few weeks later. I was riding the fence line on the Oakhaven border, checking for any winter damage, when I found the first one, a spent 12-gauge shotgun shell, bright red against the dormant grass, lying just a few feet inside my property. My heart gave a nasty thud. This wasn't deer rifle territory. This was birdshot, or maybe buckshot, close range. A little further on, I found another, then a cluster of them, along with the distinct waffle-pattern boot prints of someone who hadn't bothered to check where HOA common land ended and red clay range began. Anger, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of my neck. This wasn't just casual littering, this was evidence of armed trespass. I photographed everything, carefully bagging the shells, my mind already cataloging the date, time, and precise GPS coordinates. My years as a wildlife biologist had ingrained a meticulous attention to detail when it came to evidence gathering, a skill I now realized might be more useful in suburban warfare than I'd ever anticipated. My first port of call was, regrettably, Brenda Mulroney. I found her supervising the installation of what appeared to be an excessively ornate, multi-tiered fountain in front of the Oakhaven clubhouse, Hemlock's prophecy apparently coming true. She was dressed in a pristine white pantsuit that seemed wildly impractical for overseeing any kind of construction, her arms crossed, directing the workers with the imperious air of a Roman general. When I approached, holding one of the bagged shells, her lips thinned into a perfectly disapproving line. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine condescension, "to what do we owe this interruption?" I explained, calmly and factually, about the shells, the boot prints, and my concern about hunters straying onto my property and endangering my livestock. Her response was a masterpiece of dismissive arrogance. The Oakhaven Estates HOA has a perfectly legal, fully permitted arrangement with a reputable local hunting club to utilize designated common areas for recreational purposes, she recited, as if reading from a script. All hunters are fully licensed and insured, and are well aware of property boundaries. She waved a beringed hand dismissively. Perhaps your fences are not as robust as they should be. Or perhaps, she added, a sly little smile playing on her lips, your animals were simply curious. The implication was clear. Any problem was my fault, not hers, and certainly not the fault of her revenue generating hunters. I pressed, pointing out the shells were on my side of the fence. Well, she sniffed, I can't be responsible for every stray pellet, can I? It's a big outdoors out here. Perhaps you should consider more visible signage if you're so concerned about your cows. The way she said cows, with that little moo of distaste as if they were slightly dirty, common things, set my teeth on edge. I tried to explain, again, that these weren't just any cows, that they were a protected heritage breed, and that harassing or injuring them carried significant legal weight. She literally laughed. A short, sharp bark of amusement. Oh, Mr. Caldwell, always so dramatic. They're livestock. If they get spooked, that's hardly a federal case. The hunters are performing a community service, managing the deer population. Her ignorance was breathtaking. I realized then that reasoning with Brenda Mulroney was like trying to teach calculus to a gnat. She lived in a world where her pronouncements were law, and facts were merely inconvenient obstacles to be brushed aside. Defeated for the moment, but far from deterred, I returned to the ranch with a simmering resolve. If Brenda wouldn't listen to reason, she'd listen to evidence. I immediately ordered a dozen new high-resolution trail cameras, the kind with night vision and motion sensors. I also designed and ordered a set of large professionally printed signs: private property, no trespassing, protected heritage livestock. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. State Agricultural Code XYZ 123. I made sure the font was large, clear, and unmissable. While waiting for those, I began my own deep dive. I pulled up the Oakhaven HOA bylaws online, a fascinating document full of petty restrictions and vaguely worded powers for the board. I cross-referenced county hunting ordinances and state laws regarding agricultural protection, specifically the statutes concerning heritage breeds. My old university contacts in the veterinary and conservation departments were invaluable, providing me with supporting documentation and legal precedents about the protections afforded to breeds like the piney woods. The picture that emerged was clear. Brenda was, at best, operating in a legally gray area by allowing hunting so close to a vulnerable livestock operation, and at worst, actively facilitating a dangerous and illegal nuisance. The trail cameras arrived, and I spent a full day installing them along the Oakhaven fence line, carefully concealed, but with clear views of any potential crossing points. I also placed the new signs at 50-foot intervals. They were an eyesore, frankly, clashing with the natural beauty of the ranch, but necessity dictated. The very next weekend, the cameras paid off. I retrieved the SD cards to find clear images. 2 hunters, decked out in expensive camo, boldly stepping over my fence, rifles in hand, not 50 yards from where a group of my prize heifers were grazing. They paused, looked directly at one of my new warning signs, and one of them actually laughed, then waved dismissively at the camera before they proceeded deeper onto my land. The timestamp was clear. The audacity was astounding. This wasn't accidental trespass. This was deliberate, arrogant disregard. And the fact they seemed so unconcerned, so entitled, made me suspect Brenda's earlier comments about them being aware of boundaries were pure fiction. More likely, she'd given them carte blanche, or at least a thinly veiled nod and a wink to ignore my property lines in pursuit of their community service. The anger I'd felt earlier now began to coalesce into a cold, methodical determination. Brenda Mulroney hadn't just made an enemy. She'd made a research project. And I was very, very good at research. The brazen trespass caught on camera was the turning point. It shifted my approach from concerned neighbor to a man preparing for a siege. The first calls I made were to my network of allies. Dr. Eris Thorne, head of the Heritage Cattle Conservancy, was an old friend and a firebrand when it came to protecting rare breeds. When I described the situation and sent him the trail cam footage, along with copies of Brenda's dismissive statements, which I'd meticulously noted down after our meeting, his response was immediate and furious. "This isn't just negligence, David, it's willful endangerment." He'd boomed over the phone. "Piney woods are a national treasure. We've fought for decades to get them the recognition and protection they deserve. This HOA queen needs a serious education in agricultural law and basic decency." He promised to send over a full legal brief on the protections afforded to the piney woods, including precedent cases and contact information for state agricultural department officials who specialized in heritage breed welfare. He also offered to serve as an expert witness if needed. His support was like a shot of adrenaline. Next, I contacted Officer Miller, our local game warden. Miller was a young guy, earnest and by the book. Initially, when I'd first mentioned the hunting near my property, he'd been polite but somewhat non-committal, likely used to dealing with minor squabbles between landowners. But when I presented him with the clear photographic evidence of armed trespass, the spent shells found on my land, and Dr. Thorne's preliminary notes on the piney woods' protected status, his demeanor changed. He frowned, studying the images of the hunters casually ignoring my signs. "This is different," he admitted, tapping a photo. "This isn't just a boundary dispute. If those animals are as protected as your expert says, and these fellows are on your land armed, that's a serious problem, especially if they discharge a firearm on your property without permission, regardless of what they're aiming at." He promised to increase patrols in the area and to have a frank discussion with the president of the local hunting club that Brenda had supposedly contracted with. He also took copies of my evidence. My third call was to Sarah Jenkins, a retired lawyer who lived in one of the older, less ostentatious sections of Oakhaven. Sarah had a long-standing, quiet feud with Brenda over various HOA power plays and was known for her sharp legal mind and even sharper tongue when provoked. I laid out the situation, and she listened patiently. "Brenda Mulroney," she said with a sigh when I finished, "is a woman who believes rules are for other people. She's built herself a little fiefdom over there, and the current board are mostly her yes men. But this is beyond the pale, even for her. Endangering protected livestock, inviting armed trespassers. She's opened herself up to a world of liability, both for the HOA and personally." Sarah offered to discreetly review the HOA's bylaws and the hunting contract if I could somehow obtain a copy, looking for any procedural violations or clauses Brenda might have ignored. "Brenda's usually meticulous about the appearance of propriety," Sarah mused. "But she gets sloppy when her ego's involved, or when she thinks no one's smart enough to catch her." While my allies began their work, I escalated my own on-site defenses. I double-checked every inch of my perimeter fencing, reinforcing any weak spots. The new signs, stark and official-looking, were now a prominent feature. I also invested in a couple of more advanced trail cameras with cellular capability, allowing me to receive real-time alerts and images if they detected motion. It felt like I was fortifying a castle against barbarian hordes, which, in a way, I was. Brenda, meanwhile, seemed oblivious. I saw her a few times, driving her gleaming SUV past my fence line, her nose slightly in the air. She even had the gall to send me an official HOA violation notice for unapproved agricultural signage, citing a clause about aesthetic harmony. I filed it neatly with my growing stack of evidence, a grim smile touching my lips. The irony was almost too rich. Then came the day that pushed everything past the point of no return. It was a crisp, late autumn afternoon. I was in the lower pasture, not far from the Oakhaven border, checking on Magnolia, one of my prize Piney Woods cows, heavily pregnant and due any day. She was a beautiful brindle, gentle-natured, and genetically vital to my program. Suddenly, the crack of a rifle shattered the peace, far too close for comfort. Magnolia, normally placid, bellowed in terror and bolted, crashing through a patch of undergrowth. Simultaneously, I heard the distinctive zing-thwack of a bullet striking a tree not 30 yards from where I stood, and terrifyingly close to Magnolia's line of flight. Adrenaline surged through me. I sprinted towards the sound of the shot, roaring, "Cease fire! Livestock present! You're on private property!" I burst through a thicket to see two hunters, not the same ones from the trail cam footage, but similarly decked out, looking startled and guilty. One was lowering a high-powered rifle. They were well inside my fence line, at least 100 yards onto red clay range. "What in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing?" I yelled, my voice shaking with rage and fear for Magnolia. "You nearly shot my cow! You nearly shot me!" The older of the two, a portly man with a self-important air, actually had the nerve to look annoyed. "Hey now, buddy, calm down. We're with the Oakhaven Hunt Club. Brenda said this whole area was open for deer." The other, younger one just looked nervous. "We didn't see any cow," he mumbled, not meeting my eye. "Just a flash of brown in the trees." A flash of brown. That could have been Magnolia. My blood ran cold. I pointed to one of my large warning signs, clearly visible just beyond them. "Does that look like Oakhaven common land to you? Does that look like an invitation?" I pulled out my phone. Its camera already recording. "You're trespassing, you're discharging firearms dangerously close to protected livestock, and you're about to be in a world of trouble." Names. Now. Their arrogance deflated somewhat under my furious gaze and the sight of the recording phone. They reluctantly gave their names, still insisting Brenda had cleared them for the area. I herded them back towards my fence, my eyes scanning frantically for Magnolia. I found her half an hour later, trembling in a dense copse of pines, miraculously unharmed but clearly traumatized. The relief was so intense it left me weak-kneed, but it quickly hardened back into anger. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was reckless endangerment, directly facilitated by Brenda Mulroney's greed or incompetence, or both. When I called Officer Miller, his voice was tight. "Stay there, Mr. Caldwell. I'm on my way. And keep that video recording." This time, the frank discussion was going to involve a lot more than just words. Brenda's little hunting venture was about to blow up in her face. The near miss with Magnolia lit a fire under everyone. Officer Miller arrived within 20 minutes, his jaw set. He took statements from the two hunters, who were now looking considerably less cavalier, especially when Miller started quoting sections of state law regarding trespass with a firearm and reckless endangerment of livestock. He confiscated their weapons pending investigation and issued them both hefty citations for trespassing, with a note that further charges could follow depending on the status of my piney woods. He also took my video statement and a copy of the footage of the hunters and the bullet-scarred tree. "Brenda Mulroney's name came up again, Mr. Caldwell," he said grimly as the hunters drove off, considerably chastened. They both claimed she assured them the hunting lease covered all the wooded areas adjacent to Oakhaven. This is escalating. He promised to pay Mrs. Mulroney a visit himself. Meanwhile, Dr. Thorne from the Heritage Cattle Conservancy had not been idle. He'd contacted the State Department of Agriculture and Forestry, outlining the situation and the specific legal protections for the Piney Woods breed. He'd also, bless his aggressive heart, CC'd a couple of state legislators known for their advocacy for agricultural heritage. Suddenly, Brenda wasn't just dealing with a disgruntled neighbor. She was on the radar of state-level agencies. Sarah Jenkins, my lawyerly Oakhaven ally, had also struck a small vein of gold. After some discreet inquiries, she'd learned from a disgruntled former HOA board member that Brenda had pushed the hunting lease through with minimal discussion, citing discretionary spending needs for her beautification projects. More tantalizingly, the former board member hinted that Brenda had been unusually secretive about the exact terms of the lease and the revenue it generated, personally handling all communications with the hunting club. "She's treating that HOA fund like her personal slush fund, I'd wager," Sarah had commented dryly. "If we can get our hands on that lease agreement and the HOA financials related to it, I bet we'll find some interesting discrepancies." The smoking gun I needed, however, came from an unexpected source. One of my newer, more strategically placed trail cameras. This one was positioned not just overlooking my fence line, but with a partial view of a seldom-used access gate onto the HOA common land, a gate Brenda herself often used as a shortcut to inspect the progress of her landscaping projects. A few days after the Magnolia incident, my phone buzzed with an alert. The image that loaded was grainy, taken in the low light of early morning, but unmistakable. There was Brenda Mulroney, in one of her signature designer tracksuits, standing by that gate. With her were 3 men in hunting gear, including the portly, self-important fellow I'd confronted. And Brenda was pointing, her arm extended directly towards my lower pasture, the very area where Magnolia had nearly been shot. She was gesturing, talking animatedly. It was impossible to hear what she was saying, of course, but the visual was damning. It wasn't just that she'd told them it was okay. It looked like she was actively directing them onto my property. I nearly dropped my coffee. This was it. This was the visual proof that cut through all her plausible deniability. Armed with this new footage, along with everything else I'd compiled, the shell casings, the photos of trespassers, Miller's incident reports, Dr. Thorne's legal briefs, Sarah's insights into HOA procedure, I felt like a general preparing for a final, decisive battle. My dossier was now nearly 3 inches thick, meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and annotated. It was a monument to Brenda Mulroney's hubris. The next step was to bring this all into the light. Sarah advised that the upcoming Oakhaven Annual General Meeting was the perfect venue. Brenda will be expecting to control the narrative, to showcase her achievements like that hideous fountain, Sarah said. She won't be expecting a meticulously documented exposé of her incompetence and potential malfeasance. We need to reserve a slot on the agenda for community safety and boundary concerns, or something equally innocuous. Then, you drop the bomb. I formally requested a slot, as per HOA bylaws. The confirmation came back, approved by Brenda herself, no doubt imagining I was going to whine about fallen leaves or the aforementioned rustic odors. She had no idea. In the days leading up to the AGM, I made sure all my key players were informed. Officer Miller confirmed he couldn't officially attend in uniform to present, but he provided a strongly worded official letter summarizing his findings, the laws broken, and the ongoing investigation, which he authorized me to read. Dr. Thorne prepared a concise, powerful statement about the importance of the Piney Woods breed and the legal ramifications of endangering them, complete with photographs of my prize-winning bull, Patriot, looking noble and distinctly undeer-like. Sarah Jenkins, bless her, managed to get her hands on a copy of the actual hunting lease agreement through another disgruntled Oak Haven resident who had access to HOA files. As she'd suspected, it was vaguely worded about boundaries, but very specific about the discretionary fund. The income flowed into a fund solely controlled by Brenda for community enhancement projects with minimal oversight. There was no mention of liability insurance covering trespass onto adjacent private property, a glaring omission. The night before the AGM, I went over my presentation one last time. It was a PowerPoint, of all things, something Brenda herself favored for her endless budgetary reports. But mine wouldn't be full of pie charts about mulch expenditure. Mine had dates, times, GPS coordinates, high-resolution photographs of armed men on my land, stills from the video of Brenda directing hunters, copies of legal statutes, and quotes from Officer Miller and Dr. Thorne. It was, if I did say so myself, a thing of terrible beauty. Brenda Mulroney thought she was dealing with a slightly eccentric, easily intimidated farmer. She was about to find out she'd kicked a hornet's nest, tended by a biologist with a penchant for irrefutable data and a deep, abiding love for his very special cows. The Oak Haven Estates AGM was going to be one for the history books. The Oak Haven Estates annual general meeting was held in the clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner, and Brenda Mulroney's expensive, slightly cloying perfume. She was in her element, presiding from a small dais, wearing a power suit the color of dried blood. A tight smile plastered on her face as she rattled through the minutes of the last meeting and a glowing report of the HOA's fiscal health, conveniently glossing over the details of her discretionary fund. The majority of the board members, a collection of timid-looking individuals who seemed to exist solely to nod in agreement with Brenda, flanked her like well-dressed garden gnomes. About 30 residents were scattered amongst the uncomfortable folding chairs, most looking resigned to an evening of tedious pronouncements. Sarah Jenkins gave me a subtle nod from her seat near the front. Officer Miller's official letter and Dr. Thorne's statement felt heavy and significant in my satchel. When my agenda item, community safety and boundary concerns, D. Caldwell, was finally called, Brenda's smile tightened a fraction. "Ah, yes, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dripping with forced patience. "We've allotted you 10 minutes. Please do try to be concise." I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and took a deep breath. The first slide was an aerial photograph of Red Clay Range and Oak Haven Estates, the boundary line clearly marked. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice calm and steady. "My name is David Caldwell, and I own Red Clay Range, which borders your community. I'm here tonight to discuss a serious and ongoing threat to the safety of my property, my livestock, and potentially to your own residents, a threat directly facilitated by the actions of this HOA's leadership." A few people sat up straighter. Brenda's eyes narrowed. I then launched into my presentation. I showed the photographs of the spent shells on my land, the boot prints, the initial trail cam images of hunters casually strolling past my no trespassing signs. With each slide, I provided dates, times, and a brief, factual explanation. I saw whispers ripple through the audience. Brenda started to shift uncomfortably in her chair. Then came the photos of the bullet-scarred tree near where Magnolia had been, followed by the video footage of me confronting the two frightened hunters who explicitly stated Brenda had told them it was okay to hunt there. The room grew noticeably quieter. I read excerpts from Officer Miller's letter, detailing the trespassing violations and the ongoing investigation. I then put up a slide about the American Piney Woods cattle, showing pictures of their unique beauty and displaying the text of the state agricultural code that protected them. I read Dr. Thorne's passionate statement about their genetic importance and the severe penalties for harassment or injury. "These are not just cows, Mrs. Mulroney," I said, looking directly at her. "They are a living heritage, a critically endangered breed with more legal protection than you seem to comprehend." Brenda's face was now a mottled red, her power suit suddenly looking less powerful and more like a constraint. The murmur in the room grew louder. Several residents were looking at Brenda with open disapproval. Her usual sycophantic board members were studiously avoiding her gaze. And then I played my ace. "For months," I said, "I was told by Mrs. Mulroney that the hunters were well aware of boundaries, that any incursion was accidental. However, new evidence suggests a more direct involvement." I clicked to the next slide. It was the grainy trail cam photo of Brenda at the gate, pointing towards my pasture, with the hunters. A collective gasp went through the room. "This image," I stated, "was taken on the morning of November 14th, just days after my pregnant cow was nearly shot by hunters who, once again, claimed Mrs. Mulroney had authorized their presence in that specific area." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Brenda sputtering, That's taken out of context." I was merely indicating the extent of HOA common land, but the image, combined with the accumulated weight of the preceding evidence, was damning. Sarah Jenkins then chose her moment. "Mrs. Mulroney," she called out, her voice clear and carrying, "perhaps you could also explain to the residents why the hunting lease agreement, which I have a copy of here, directs all revenue into a discretionary fund under your sole control, with no specific provisions for liability should your invited hunters cause damage or injury on adjacent private properties? Or why there appears to be no record of this income being fully disclosed or audited in a transparent manner." That was the financial shiv, expertly twisted. The meeting descended into controlled chaos. Residents were on their feet, demanding answers from Brenda, who looked like she'd swallowed a hornet's nest. Her board members were visibly panicked, trying to distance themselves. One of them, a mousy woman named Carol, actually whispered, "I told her we needed more oversight on that fund." Loud enough for several people to hear. The carefully constructed facade of Brenda Mulroney, competent community leader, was crumbling before our eyes. Calls for her immediate resignation began to echo through the clubhouse. The motion was quickly seconded, and in a stunningly swift vote of no confidence, passed overwhelmingly. Brenda, pale and trembling, was effectively deposed on the spot. The remaining board members, looking shell-shocked, immediately voted to suspend the hunting contract indefinitely and to launch a full audit of the HOA's finances, specifically Brenda's discretionary fund. The aftermath was swift and deeply satisfying. Brenda Mulroney resigned from the HOA presidency the very next day, a terse, one-sentence email her only parting shot. The audit Sarah had pushed for uncovered, as suspected, a host of irregularities in how Brenda had managed the hunting lease revenue and other discretionary expenditures. While it stopped short of outright embezzlement, it revealed a pattern of gross mismanagement and a shocking lack of transparency, enough for the new HOA board to consider further civil action to recoup misused funds. The hunting club, facing potential lawsuits from me and intense scrutiny from the game warden and state agencies, permanently terminated their agreement with Oakhaven and reportedly blacklisted the 2 hunters I'd caught on my land from their membership. Officer Miller's investigation, bolstered by my evidence, resulted in significant fines for the hunters involved in the Magnolia incident for reckless endangerment, on top of their trespassing tickets. The State Department of Agriculture and Forestry issued a formal warning to the Oakhaven HOA, reminding them of their obligations regarding adjacent agricultural properties and protected breeds. For Red Clay Range, the change was palpable. The woods along my fence line fell silent, free from the crack of unexpected gunfire. My piney woods grazed peacefully, undisturbed. Magnolia delivered a healthy bull calf a few weeks later, a beautiful little spotted fellow I named Justice. The new HOA board, humbled and eager to make amends, reached out to me. We established clear lines of communication and even discussed potential collaborations, like allowing supervised educational tours of the ranch for Oakhaven children to learn about heritage breeds and responsible land management, something Brenda would have sooner paved paradise for. My ranch, once viewed as a rustic anomaly by the Oakhaven elite, started to be seen as a unique local asset. Dr. Thorne was delighted, and the Heritage Cattle Conservancy featured Red Clay Range in their newsletter as a case study in successful community advocacy and breed protection. Old Man Hemlock just grinned when I told him the full story, sipped his coffee and said, "Told you that Brenda was riding for a fall. Pride, son, it'll get 'em every time." It was a long, stressful battle, one that consumed months of my life. But looking out over my peaceful pastures, watching Justice kick up his heels beside his mother, I knew it was worth every ounce of effort. It wasn't just about protecting my property or my animals. It was about standing up to a bully who believed her title gave her dominion over common sense, common decency, and the law. It turns out, a well-aimed PowerPoint presentation, backed by irrefutable facts and a little bit of legal muscle, can be a far more effective weapon than any high-powered rifle in the wrong hands. So, that's my HOA saga. What's the craziest thing you've ever had to deal with from your neighborhood association? Drop your stories in the comments below, I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this tale of suburban justice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of when entitlement meets its match. You never know what kind of battle might be brewing just over the fence.